morning, Master.
Good morning, Jeannie.
Oh, Master, you shouldn't have.
I know, I didn't.
You mean that present is not for me?
No?
It is for another girl.
It was the ultimate mid-century TV romance between a dashing astronaut and his fiercely devoted 2,000-year-old blonde Jeannie. For 4 seasons, millions of viewers tuned in to witness their magical, high-stakes game of romantic tension. But behind the glamorous Hollywood facade, a single highly controversial scene was filmed that would instantly bring the show to its premature end. The talked-about scene. Decades after I Dream of Jeannie first lit up TV screens in the 1960s, it still remains a legendary part of pop culture classics. You could hardly walk into any conversation about classic television without someone talking about the fantasy sitcom. For 4 incredible seasons, the show thrived on the romantic yet hilarious connection between the characters, Tony, an American astronaut who finds himself falling in love with Jeannie, a 2,000-year-old Jeannie. Alongside other interesting casts, the show's entire premise was what kept millions of households hooked, week after week. However, the show made a drastic decision on December 2nd, 1969, that cost them their viewership. In Season 5, Episode 11, titled The Wedding, it was supposed to be the milestone that could have changed the course of the show, but it did in a way that no one expected. In this episode, Major Tony Nelson and Jeannie were finally getting married, but let's just say the viewers didn't like the idea causing a rampage. Behind the scenes, panic set in as the producers of the show knew the public outrage was going to be really bad. The series creator Sidney Sheldon, along with lead actors Barbara Eden and Larry Hagman, explicitly warned the network executives that allowing the characters to get married would destroy the show. They explained that the comedy of the show depended entirely on the secret dynamic and the fact that Jeannie was an untouchable, mysterious entity. But the network waved away the warnings, trusting their own corporate decisions. With the audience reaction proving the creators right within days, the show's viewership tanked like never before. The thrill of the chase vanished completely, and the audience no longer tuned in. Within a few months of that single scene airing, the once high-flying sitcom faced a sudden cancellation by NBC. To understand how Hollywood executives could make such a catastrophic miscalculation, we have to look back at the desperate corporate battle that birthed the series in the first place. Back in 1964, network rival ABC struck television gold with the massive ratings success of Bewitched, a fantasy romantic comedy sitcom. Over at NBC, they needed an idea to cash in on the sudden public craze for fantasy comedies. Prolific writer Sidney Sheldon drafted an original concept birthing the show I Dream of Jeannie, and while the concept was in motion, he set a firm creative boundary known as the anti-Samantha rule. He mandated that the actress chosen for the role couldn't be blonde, mainly because the studio wanted to dodge accusations of plagiarism of the ABC hit show, especially since their lead actress was blonde. When the script was finally approved, casting directors spent weeks searching for the right lead. Dozens of talented brunettes auditioned for the part, yet none of them captured exactly what the script required until Barbara Eden walked into the audition room. Even though she was blonde, her undeniable charisma was what Sheldon had been looking for, making him break his own rule. The backdrop of the series aligned perfectly with the excitement over NASA programs and Cape Kennedy rocket launches in the mid-60s. Placing an astronaut at the center gave the show an immediate connection to the space race mania sweeping the nation. With an astronaut and a magical entity in one series, it was exactly the show viewers were willing to sign up for. As the character Major Nelson spent most of his time frantically trying to hide his supernatural companion from his overly analytical and suspicious boss, Dr. Bellows. Every single week brought close calls and crazy cover stories as Tony protected his military career, his sanity, and his secret life from blowing wide open. It all worked well, as Jeannie stayed an unobtainable, otherworldly creature living in secret. It was their unrequited dynamic that fueled the humor and kept viewers glued to their screens week after week. While the chemistry on screen appeared effortless and magical to audiences at home, the atmosphere backstage was rapidly devolving into an absolute nightmare. Backstage chaos. Larry Hagman, the lead actor, found himself growing increasingly frustrated with his role. He realized that playing Major Tony Nelson meant he was merely being the supporting character, while a glamorous woman in a striking harem outfit captured all the attention. That professional ego clash mixed with intense personal pressure, causing him to lean heavily on alcohol and various substances to survive long production hours. His erratic behavior quickly turned into legendary Hollywood lore through a series of chaotic outbursts. During one filming day, a noisy air conditioning unit kept ruining the audio tracks. Fed up with the buzzing sound, Hagman grabbed a real fireman's axe and violently chopped the machine to pieces, accidentally cutting power to the entire building. On another occasion, he wandered onto a neighboring soundstage wearing a full gorilla suit and shouted profanities to scare off a group of visiting nuns touring the set of another production. It wasn't just Larry's unpredictable nature. Script arguments became a regular part of the daily routine as well. The actor in particular frequently stalled production by yelling at writers and producers if he thought weekly storylines lacked basic humor or logical sense. Tensions reached a breaking point behind closed doors, as NBC executives grew so tired of the constant unpredictability that they drew up active plans to fire him, lining up actor Darren McGavin to take over the role of Major Nelson. His saving grace was Barbara Eden, who stepped in to plead his case, buying him enough time to turn things around, at least temporarily. Realizing they needed to find a practical solution, the creative team brought in a professional therapist to help manage the actor. In a strange twist, the specialist recommended that Larry consume champagne throughout the workday, simply to keep his nerves steady and his behavior compliant enough to finish filming. Yet, Hagman's volatile behavior was nothing compared to the endless nitpicking from the network's Standards and Practices department. Television production during that era operated under strict modesty codes enforced by the National Association of Broadcasters. Before any show or movie is broadcast, every single frame faces intense scrutiny before reaching home screens. The costume designers of the sitcom faced a tricky task when creating Jeannie's iconic pink harem outfit. They had to balance the exotic look of the character with rigid network rules covering the lower torso. Despite their efforts, television executives held a bizarre fixation on Barbara Eden's belly button, making sure it never appeared on camera. On set, the reality proved even more tedious. Wardrobe assistants received explicit instructions to shadow the lead actress between every single take. They rushed forward constantly to check the costume and pull up the waistband before cameras rolled again. This strict enforcement created an odd double standard. The scripts routinely featured heavy, suggestive adult jokes and double entendres in the dialogue, yet a navel was an unforgivable scandal. During physical action scenes or dance routines, the costume would move around, making film editors spend hours carefully inspecting the footage, frame by frame, cutting out any accidental glimpse of skin during post-production work. The media eventually caught wind of these strict rules, turning the situation into a widespread public spectacle, dubbed the Belly Button War. Far from hurting the production, the media attention provided fantastic free publicity that kept curious viewers tuning in week after week. As the show entered its 5th year, the network faced a much bigger problem than exposed skin. The ratings slump, high-concept fantasy sitcoms were beginning to lose their appeal, as the 1960s drew to a close. As viewers' tastes changed, the once popular magic and fantasy sitcoms started to feel outdated as they began to notice that every episode followed the same predictable pattern. As episodes went by, the show followed an identical pattern, where Jeannie conjured up a magical mess, and Major Nelson frantically cleaned it up before anyone found out. The predictable cycle stopped amusing people who wanted fresher, more grounded television choices. Network scheduling decisions made the decline happen even faster. NBC suffered from terrible management choices that changed the program across 5 different time slots during its run. Changing channels and times confused loyal fans who struggled to keep track of when the show aired. For its final season, the series was moved to Tuesday nights, where it faced stiff competition from ABC's hit crime drama, The Mod Squad. Financial pressures added fuel to the fire behind the scenes. The salaries of the main leads increased significantly after multiple successful seasons, and the continuous need for optical special effects photography made each installment expensive to produce. Boardrooms at NBC filled with panic as executives watched their reliable cash cow lose its dominant foothold in the weekly ratings race. Leadership demanded a massive, status quo-shattering event that would generate explosive press headlines and force the public to take notice once again. They wanted a shock to the system that would instantly reverse the downward trend. As executives scrambled to save the show, they saw how another NBC comedy, Get Smart, had boosted its ratings with a wedding storyline and decided to try something similar for I Dream of Jeannie. However, it would be the start of the show's downfall. The spy series Get Smart faced its own severe ratings crisis during the 1968 to 1969 television season. Desperate to salvage viewership, producers of the show took a massive gamble and married off lead characters Maxwell Smart and Agent 99. The stunt delivered a massive 37 Nielsen share, temporarily saving the spy comedy from cancellation and creating a shiny new trend inside executive boardrooms. NBC executive Mort Werner watched that success and became utterly convinced that a wedding was the answer to boosting the ratings of any struggling show. He issued a firm corporate decree stating that Major Tony Nelson and Jeannie must get married during the first half of Season 5. Network leadership wanted a guaranteed headline grabber, ignoring the long-term consequences of messing with the core premise of the series. They believed a Wedding Bells episode would instantly pull in curious viewers and fix the declining weekly numbers. Sidney Sheldon, as well as the cast, didn't agree to the wedding idea, especially since I Dream of Jeannie and Get Smart were 2 different story dynamics. Tony and Jeannie had a completely different kind of relationship. The show's humor depended on the tension between a magical genie devoted to an ordinary man and his constant attempts to keep her extraordinary powers a secret. Taking away that secret tension stripped the show of its primary source of humor. But still, the network ignored every single creative warning. Executives threatened to pull financial backing if the writers refused to deliver a wedding script right away. Forced into a corner, the creative team had no choice but to write an episode that broke every single established rule of the show's universe: the wedding episode. Drafting a legal marriage for a 2,000-year-old magical entity created instant narrative knots. Jeannie possessed no social security card, birth certificate, or legal human status required to marry an active-duty Air Force officer. Writers also manufactured a sudden plot hole regarding photography. Even though Jeannie had appeared in normal pictures countless times over previous seasons, the script claimed she could not be captured on film. This contradiction led to a campy storyline involving a physical mannequin proxy, standing in for her during official photos so NASA leadership would never uncover the secret. Visually, the transformation hit even harder. Jeannie said goodbye to her signature pink harem outfit and stepped into a traditional white wedding dress, leaving behind the magical, mysterious look that had made her stand out since the series began. Major Roger Healy scrambled around as the ultimate best man, frantically helping Tony pull off a ceremony that defied common sense and government paperwork. On the soundstage, the set gleamed with mid-century floral arrangements, yet the actors wore masks of forced joy. Cast members felt the underlying tension firsthand because everyone recognized the creative direction felt wrong. The wedding episode ended with Tony and Jeannie exchanging rings, a moment executives believed would revive the show's ratings. Instead, it became a turning point. The moment the episode concluded, the light-hearted, rebellious energy that made the series what it was vanished completely. To make matters worse, the network wasn't content with airing the episode. They launched a grotesque real-world marketing stunt that completely backfired. The network executives didn't just stop at the wedding scene on screen. They took steps further and launched a multi-city promotional campaign involving a full-scale mock wedding built specifically for the press corps. Barbara Eden and Larry Hagman found themselves required to slip into full wedding attire, attending a staged reception solely to entertain journalists and flashing camera crews. However, the stunt backfired immediately. Reporters in the room found the entire experience corny, deeply uncomfortable, and painfully forced. Television critics across the country published scathing articles calling out the network for a transparent attempt to buy ratings instead of relying on organic storytelling. Viewers shared the frustration, flooding NBC mailrooms with angry letters complaining that the magical illusion of the show had been ruined long before the actual episode hit home screens. The actors shared the public distaste for the corporate circus. Larry Hagman made his feelings clear to reporters, openly stating that the creative soul of the series suffered a fatal blow for a cheap headline. By trying to turn a fantasy sitcom premise into a real-world celebrity wedding, the network shattered the cozy escapist bubble that fans cherished. When the actual episode finally broadcast, initial curiosity drove decent numbers for a single night. Executives celebrated prematurely, ignoring the steep cliff awaiting them the following week. Just as Sheldon, Eden, and Hagman predicted, the moment the episodic tension came to an end, so did the interest of the audience. The lethal drop. When it comes to romantic movie or series plots, there's a particular pattern that shows viewers stay hooked as long as there's some kind of tension between characters. But when that underlying tension is resolved, it usually ruins audience investment. Barbara Eden noted years later that marrying Jeannie off completely changed the character. Instead of an independent, powerful, supernatural entity, she became a house-trained, traditional wife. The comedy dried up almost overnight because the core conflict disappeared. Tony no longer needed to frantically hide a secret mistress from his boss and the military base. The writers replaced thrilling, magical escapades with mundane domestic sitcom tropes that felt typical and uninspired. Without the thrill of discovery, the unique charm of the premise evaporated completely. The Nielsen's went into a devastating freefall over the final 13 episodes of the season. Casual fans deserted the channel entirely, choosing to watch other competing shows instead. Also, Larry Hagman recalled that the writing quality took a sharp downward slide during this final stretch. The scripts felt rushed, made little sense, and lacked any organic humor. The collapse was so total and swift that the network didn't even bother to give the iconic cast a proper heads-up that they were out of a job. NBC executives quietly pulled the plug on the series mid-run without scheduling an official wrap party or broadcasting any kind of farewell message to the loyal viewers. The final broadcast arrived with zero fanfare or public notice. The series came to an end on May 26, 1970, with episode 130, My Turn to Master. Rather than giving viewers a meaningful send-off, it ended as if it were just another week. Families watched an ordinary storyline unfold on their living room screens completely unaware that the magical bottle had been permanently sealed for good. The harsh reality of the cancellation hit the lead actor in a bizarre and humiliating fashion weeks later. Larry Hagman walked onto the quiet studio lot during the summer break, planning to pick up a few personal belongings left behind in his dressing room. Instead of a warm welcome, a studio security guard stopped him at the gate, casually mentioning that the sitcom had been canceled a while back and studio workers had already packed away his personal items into cardboard boxes. No phone call from an executive arrived to break the news, and no official studio memo ever reached his mailbox to explain the situation. That kind of corporate disregard was common in the early days of television. Network executives looked at shows almost entirely through the lens of ratings and profits, and when a series was no longer delivering, they moved on without much thought for the actors and crew who had spent years bringing it to life. For Larry Hagman, the abrupt cancellation was especially difficult to accept. Frustrated and deeply angered by the casual cruelty of the television business, he stepped away from network television work for several years to process the harsh treatment and continue his career. The cast never got to film a proper goodbye, leaving the entire series to end on a random, unremarkable, episodic note that offered zero emotional closure to the millions of people who tuned in every single week. It wasn't long before the actors learned firsthand that network loyalty existed only as long as the weekly ratings charts remained high. When the ratings declined, the network quickly canceled the show, treating the people behind it as if their years of hard work meant nothing. But the ultimate insult to the legacy of I Dream of Jeannie came just weeks later, when the studio ordered the demolition of one of television's most iconic sets. The ruins of Jeannie's world, since the show had ended and the actors and the members of the cast and crew had gone back to their lives, what was left of the show was the interior set, which had been standing for months, incurring continuous overhead storage fees. To make room for new productions and cut costs, Screen Gems executives ordered the sets to be torn down and thrown away, including the famous oversized velvet-lined interior of Jeannie's bottle. Instead of preserving the sets, props, and costumes for future generations, the studio ordered nearly everything connected to the show to be destroyed. At the time, television syndication and preserving production memorabilia weren't seen as valuable business opportunities, so the materials were simply treated as things to be thrown away. Crews moved in with sledgehammers to tear down the interior sets, representing Major Nelson's famous mid-century Florida home in Cocoa Beach. The living room walls, the kitchen, and the iconic master bedroom disappeared into piles of splintered wood and twisted metal. The props weren't spared either. Most of the hand-painted Jim Beam decanter bottles used on the show were simply tossed into studio dumpsters. Barbara Eden managed to save just one of the original bottles after stepping in before the rest were destroyed. The costumes suffered the same fate. Most of Barbara Eden's iconic pink silk harem outfits were either tossed out or abandoned in damp basement storage, where moths and water damage destroyed the ones that remain. No one on the executive team recognized that fans would one day view those items as treasured pieces of pop culture history. The studio wiped the sound stages clean of any physical evidence that the series ever filmed there, leaving behind empty rooms and silent hallways. While the physical sets were reduced to ash, audience tastes and network priorities were changing in ways that would have brought the show to an end anyway. The 1970 cultural shift, with the wave of whimsical genres of one television season declining during the 1970s, it became an industry change that broadcasting history remembers as the rural purge. Networks systematically targeted and canceled high-concept whimsical programming en masse, The shows that once dominated the ratings charts like Bewitched, The Beverly Hillbillies, and Green Acres were suddenly seen as outdated relics of a naive, simpler decade that the country had already left behind. The cultural appetite moved dramatically toward realism. A new wave of gritty, socially conscious, and grounded television spearheaded by visionary producer Norman Lear took over prime-time slots. Groundbreaking programs like All in the Family, MASH, and The Mary Tyler Moore Show replaced magic tricks, talking animals, and bottle-dwelling spirits with sharp, real-world commentary tackling politics, civil rights, inflation, and everyday domestic struggles. Viewers wanted television characters who reflected the actual friction of daily life, rather than glossy escapism set on pristine studio backlots. At the same time, network advertisers desperately coveted a younger, urban demographic that held significant purchasing power. This emerging audience completely rejected the space-age fantasy tropes and campy humor that viewers used to enjoy in the era of Major Nelson. America changed rapidly under the heavy shadow of the Vietnam War, growing far more cynical, questioning authority, and seeking genuine emotional resonance on screen. In that new landscape, a magical genie granting wishes on a military base felt entirely disconnected from the national mood, appealing mostly to rural or older demographics that corporate executives no longer prioritized for lucrative advertising dollars. Cultural irrelevance spelled doom for any program refusing to adapt to the new rules of engagement. Even without the forced wedding storyline destroying the core romantic tension, I Dream of Jeannie lacked the organic traits required to survive the cynical new television era. The premature marriage plot did not create the final downfall on its own. Instead, the wedding simply accelerated a death sentence that changing cultural tides were already preparing to deliver to fantasy television as a whole, proving that time waits for no one, and in this case, no sitcom. However, this multi-million-dollar corporate failure taught Hollywood an invaluable lesson that forever changed the way television scripts are written today. The sudden cancellation of I Dream of Jeannie quickly turned into a mandatory case study taught in writers' rooms and network boardrooms across subsequent decades. Industry veterans codified a sacred golden rule for episodic storytelling. Never, under any circumstances, resolve the core romantic tension too early in a television run. Network creators took careful notes from that historical miscalculation. When the 1980s arrived, smash hits like Cheers actively avoided falling into the same trap. Writers kept millions of viewers hooked week after week by constantly throwing obstacles in front of Sam Malone and Diane Chambers. They chose to maintain ongoing narrative friction to keep the relationship running smoothly, instead of settling the characters down in boring harmony too soon. Years later, creators David Crane and Marta Kaufman deliberately subjected television audiences to 10 full years of Ross and Rachel frustration on Friends, specifically citing older sitcom failures as their primary warning. They understood that giving the audience permanent happiness too quickly destroyed the weekly mystery of whether the couple would eventually figure things out. Other networks learned the lesson the hard way when they ignored the historical warning signs. The 1980s detective series Moonlighting famously crashed in the ratings the exact moment lead. Characters played by Bruce Willis and Sybil Shepherd finally slept together and committed to a relationship, proving the original Jeannie curse remained very much active and dangerous. Even modern production rooms applied the timeless lesson years later. Writers working on The Office carefully delayed Jim and Pam's wedding until season 6, protecting the early structural integrity of the workspace romance and keeping viewers invested through years of quiet, unresolved longing and subtle glances across the desk. The ultimate irony remains staggering. a network-mandated executive shortcut designed purely to squeeze out a quick temporary ratings spike, permanently ruined a multi-million-dollar syndication powerhouse that could have thrived for years longer. Television thrives entirely on yearning. The moment a writer finally satisfies the deepest wish of the audience, the narrative tension dies, and the show ceases to exist. Despite the tragic, unceremonious ending, the magical chemistry between Barbara Eden and Larry Hagman refused to stay dead in the decades that followed. The reunion movies and Hagman's irony. After network executives pulled the plug, daytime reruns flooded local television stations across the country throughout the late 1970s and 1980s. A brand new generation of viewers discovered the series, transforming it into a massive cultural milestone through daily syndication. Fans fell in love with the classic episodes all over again, creating an overwhelming public demand for closure that forced the studio to revisit the famous premise. Network leaders eventually greenlit made-for-television movies to satisfy the audience. Viewers tuned in for I Dream of Jeannie 15 years later, in 1985, and later for I Still Dream of Jeannie in 1991. One major piece was missing from the reunion projects. Larry Hagman chose not to reprise his original role, forcing producers to recast Major Tony Nelson with actor Wayne Rogers to star alongside Barbara Eden. Larry enjoyed a massive career renaissance in a completely different television genre. The actor who once felt frustrated playing the grounded, straight-laced lead in a light-hearted fantasy sitcom went on to become television's ultimate villain as J.R. Ewing in the hit primetime drama Dallas. In a twist of fate, the role gave him the creative freedom he had spent years searching for. The two former co-stars eventually shared the screen once more. In 1990, Barbara Eden guest-starred on Dallas, bringing the iconic duo back together for a memorable television moment that delighted longtime fans everywhere. The two also frequently traveled together and appeared at major fan conventions such as DragonCon and participated in high-profile TV talk show retrospective interviews, openly talking and celebrating the legacy of the show. Despite the frantic soundstage pressure and creative clashes of the 60s, Eden and Hagman maintained a warm, affectionate friendship. Unfortunately, Hagman passed away at the age of 81 from complications of acute myeloid leukemia on November 23, 2012, in a hospital in Dallas, Texas, while actively filming the revival series of his hit show, Dallas. After his passing, Eden released a heartfelt tribute, expressing that the immediate magical chemistry they shared on set evolved into a profound, lifelong friendship that she would cherish forever. A short-sighted decision by the network brought the original run of the series to an early end, showing how executive interference can undermine even a great idea. Even so, it couldn't erase the magic that made I Dream of Jeannie so special. Do you think the show could have survived the 1970s if they had never filmed that fateful wedding scene? Or were they destined to crash land regardless? Let us know what you think in the comment below. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and click the notification icon for more videos like this. Thanks for watching.